Good evening, everyone. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service. You're watching Alaska Weather with us on the 25th of June. Thanks for joining us tonight. And as always, you can get your latest forecast information anytime by calling 1-800-472-0391. Find us online at weather.gov/Alaska and on your mobile device, mobile.weather.gov. It's a great way to save on your bandwidth there and your data charges. It works a lot better in low bandwidth situations too. So if you don't have a good signal, try mobile.weather.gov on your smart device there. If you can't find what you're looking for, let me know. david.snyder@noaa.gov is a very easy way to find me. As we're looking at the hazard chart for tonight, up around Squentna, the flood advisory is posted there. We've got a lot of warm weather lately, and that's been melting some of the glaciers. The river level is just above minor flood stage there. I'm not expecting any major concerns. However, there is some area of water that's been building up into areas close to the homes there, of course, and you know where those spots are. But around the Squentna River there, the water levels there are up just above that minor flood stage. So a cause for some minor concern there, and a flood advisory has been posted because of that reason there. As we go out ahead into the rest of the week, we're certainly watching the fire danger around a large part of Alaska, especially the interior, with more than a few fires burning there, and certainly fires down across the western Kenai Peninsula, and the potential for more should conditions start some more fires across west and southwestern Alaska, even northwestern Alaska. Down around the Kenai, we have extreme fire danger right now listed based on some of the indices that we see, and also across the upper Yukon Valley. And an awful lot of smoke just drifting around the interior of Alaska because we're under high pressure and there's no big push of wind coming through to sweep that out or to mix it up very much. So because of that, we've got smoke that develops during burning and just gets trapped in some of the lower parts of the atmosphere and is not mixed up very well. And that's exactly what we've been seeing here around South Central. However, overnight last night we had a little bit of a southwesterly push that moved that all along the Chugach and into the Eagle River Valley. So many of you north of Anchorage have probably seen a tremendous amount of smoke coming off of that fire, certainly everywhere in between as well. But the chances are there's not a fire in the Anchorage area or north. It's all coming from what's down on the Kenai Peninsula right now. So certainly worth watching. And as always, remember to be careful with fire when you're out and about. It's beautiful to be out in the summertime, but it's always very important to be mindful with what you're doing and where you're burning and what time of day and certainly what conditions you're burning in. So be careful out there and help everybody out. Here's a look at the satellite picture. This is the visible satellite picture. This is like going up in the space station and taking a picture of the Earth and seeing the clouds down below. You can see a broad area of low pressure here north and east of Shemya. Some fog in Shemya today as a result of that. A little bit of shower activity across the Alaska Peninsula, as well as areas of fog scattered up and down the Aleutians. And showers working up the southwest coast, but just east of that, beautifully dry and mostly sunny weather from Kodiak to Dillingham, Bethel, all the way up toward Nome. High pressures in charge of the northern coast as well as the interior. And you can see a little bit of leftover cloud cover around some of the mountains and another broad area of cloud cover just kind of trapped under high pressure, not moving very much at all. Very dry conditions across parts of southeast. Daytime clouds are bubbling up there from Northway to Dawson and just about to Fairbanks. Most of the Yukon is sitting just south of a cold front that's now working its way south and east and away from Alaska. Watch the loop one more time and you can sort of see that moving south and east just a little bit. The boundary's right about here. Not a whole lot going on out in front of that. In normal situations, we would think that front would be really capable of producing shower and storm activity, and it has recently, but today it looks like most of the convective focus will be out across the Yukon, British Columbia region, and probably across some of the higher terrain of southeast. Chances are that'll be more showery than anything else. But watch one more time around the Gulf of Alaska as high pressure has trapped a lot of that cloud cover, just kind of being a murky mess here across the Gulf, not quite reaching south of Sitka into Clarence Strait. You'll notice dry conditions there around Kodiak and all the way into the southern end of Cook Inlet. And certainly it's allowing a lot of that sunshine to heat the interior and south central and southwest, where temperatures today, once again, are expected in the upper 70s and maybe even lower 80s for some folks. The next couple days could be even warmer as that high pressure ridge settles in. Here's a look at the surface chart. Low pressure sitting out across the western Gulf at 997 millibars. One really interesting thing about this, of course, is the volcanic eruption, I believe, of Rakok out across the Kuril Islands. That was on Friday. And as that ash moved eastward, it got caught up in this low pressure system. And that's good and bad. It's good in that it has dispersed a lot of the ash and held that out across the Bering Sea, the southern Aleutians, the central Aleutians, and just south. The good part is that it has really held that back from moving into western Alaska. But as the last couple days have gone on, this storm is working its way eastward just a little bit, and it's allowing that eastern edge of the ash to get closer and closer to western Alaska and push its way up toward Nome. So you may have seen, if you're flying around, the volcanic ash advisories there. That is a real thing, and that was a substantial eruption out in the west, and a sign that even volcanoes that are not here in the United States or even in Alaska can affect us here locally. So certainly something to pay attention to. You can check out more information and get the very latest prognostications. They're updated several times a day, as well as mapping and coordinates there for that ash cloud. Simply go to weather.gov/VAAC. That's Volcanic Ash Advisory Center. And that's the center right here in the Anchorage office, and they can certainly give you more information there if that is a concern for you. It sounds like flights are still moving around through the area. Many folks are not finding a very concentrated flow of ash, but there was a pilot report earlier today out of Shemya that did call in the ash cloud there. So it is certainly out there and certainly visible, and something that you should be mindful of. High pressure sitting across the Gulf as we head into tonight. That is going to bank up low moisture up across the north and eastern Gulf Coast. Most areas are going to stay fairly clear. Showers around the Wrangell-St. Elias region, pushing into Haines and Skagway, perhaps just above on the mountaintops. And there's our cold front slowly moving south and east. You can see generally clear conditions there across the interior and north, with low pressure across the western Bering at 996 millibars, a trough of low pressure. All that remains from that organized area of the frontal boundary is that's slowly falling apart again. It's allowing that ash to be more mixed into the overall weather pattern. But we also have a healthy southerly flow working up the west coast, not only at the surface, but at the mid-levels there, and that is going to help to keep things stirred up and the overall air mass moving northward more than it is moving eastward. As we get into your Wednesday, low pressure still sitting out across the western Bering, 998 millibars now. Areas of fog, light rain, some drizzle all the way down the west coast into the central and eastern chain. High pressure sitting up across the Beaufort Seacoast. Winds will remain generally quiet and calm, with areas of fog right here across the Beaufort Seacoast. Watch for some showers around the Talkeetnas and into the northern parts of the Alaska Range. Not expecting any considerable convective weather, and we might see a few showers popping up across the boundary range. Right now, the risk of thunderstorm activity is pretty low, so this will likely be more showers than anything else. High pressure continues to sit across the central and eastern Gulf, and with that, we may still see some patchy areas of fog across the eastern parts of the water, but most areas will at least get a little bit more of a break as we get into your afternoon. By Thursday, the center of the high is working southward, but it is still strengthening. This is going to be a pretty impressive high-pressure system that is still sending a lot of heat up into the Arctic, with areas of light rain and drizzle across the north and western parts of the Brooks Range. Might see some showers pop up across the Talkeetnas and the northern parts of the Alaska Range once again, but generally speaking, it's going to be a fairly quiet day as high pressure is strong enough to keep most of that in check. And we've added in the smoke symbol there for the Kenai. It looks like with high pressure in place, there may be kind of a widespread area of smoke just hovering around, just like what we're talking about with the interior. This is going to be one of those situations where the winds are light, things are not getting mixed up, and any smoke that is produced, especially on hotter days that are more capable of producing or sustaining more burning, there could be quite a bit of smoke in the region. So keep that in mind, and certainly make sure you're checking in with 511.alaska.gov for travel advisories. If you've got plans that take you into the central Kenai, around the Ski Lac Refuge, around Kenai Lakes, or just down the Kenai River to get some of the fish, make sure you're checking in on the traffic conditions there, because DOT has been issuing travel advisories there and giving frequent posts about some of the traffic concerns in that area. So once again, 511.alaska.gov. Out across the west, areas of light rain, fog, all surrounding that low pressure system from north to south, mainly off coast though, not so much right on the west coast. So good news there. And the focus for shower and maybe a few thunderstorms, if they develop at all, pushing southward just a little bit more across southeast. Otherwise, generally northerly, drier, warmer flow. Checking temps for Wednesday morning, low to mid-50s, mild in southeast. South Central's looking at temps in the upper 40s to mid-50s, especially warm around the Susitna Valley. Out across the west and southwest, some areas could push the mid to upper 50s, even 60 degrees overnight. Fairbanks close to 50 degrees. The North Slope and the coastal plain above freezing for just about everywhere except Prudhoe Bay and Dead Horse, 31 around Kaktovik, 54 in Nome, 45 in Gamble and St. Paul. For high temperatures on your Wednesday, back in the lower to mid 70s for most areas. The interior mid to upper 70s in some cases, close to 70 in Eagle, 60s pushing 70 for southern parts of southeast, upper 30s and lower 40s for the north. Wainwright, Point Hope, Point Lay, all nearing 50 degrees, 53 in St. Paul.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
And on to your aviation weather now. IFR should be fairly widespread across the Gulf, nosing right up against the outer coast of southeast with a little bit of marginal IFR or marginal ceilings and vis pushing into the inside passage just a little bit. Most areas along the eastern side of that won't have quite as many issues there, and that extends up into the Lynn Canal. MVFR extended across the Copper River Valley coastline and also into parts of Prince William Sound, on the Wrangell St. Elias, South Central, Kenai Peninsula, Kodiak Island, and then wrapping through the Alaska Peninsula and up through the Yukon Delta. IFR hit and miss across the Arctic coast there. MVFR really inland just a hair more. As we get into Wednesday afternoon, really no significant changes from what we start off with in the morning. Most of the interior, your mountain passes, will all be VFR. Watch for building afternoon clouds, but the greatest extent of that will likely be across some of the boundary range mountains there, and with that we expect to see shower and thunderstorm activity become a little more possible. As we get into Thursday morning, once again, no significant change going into the next day. Shower and thunderstorm activity may be popping up through the early morning hours there across the boundary range, and then across the northern Gulf Coast into Prince William Sound, right along Kenai Fjords and the eastern Barrens, probably looking at least a possibility for MVFR. IFR further out to sea and from AKwx southward down toward Chignik and out across some of the North Pacific waters there. The eastern, central, and western Aleutians all expected to be IFR. St. Paul, St. George up to St. Matthew, Nunivak Island, and into the Bering Strait we go with IFR conditions there, and along the outer coast of the North Slope. But most of the coastal areas themselves likely only dealing with marginal conditions there, right along the coast into the Kobuk and Noatak valleys and into the Yukon and Kuskokwim, as well as the Bristol Bay region and Chillicothe Strait. Again, no significant change for your Thursday afternoon. Shower and thunderstorm activity spreads a little bit further southward into central and southern parts of southeast. We're going to watch for IFR to be fairly widespread across the Gulf. No significant issues for the interior at all. We will see marginal conditions in the Kobuk and Noatak areas, and IFR may just pass right over some of the coastal areas of the Chukchi Sea villages with St. Matthew, St. Paul, St. George all holding at IFR. We will see one little change, I should say. Marginal weather may set up across parts of Adak and Atka or very close to it, as well as parts of the Alaska Peninsula. So maybe some improvement out west. Here is a look at your pass conditions for Anaktuvik and Adigan Pass. As you just saw, it looks like most of the interior passes are going to be A-OK from Adigan Pass all the way down to Lake Clark and Merrill Pass. Rainy Pass, Windy, and Isabel Pass all expected to be VFR. Mentasta Pass looks pretty good. And once again, the threat for thunderstorm conditions as well as Portage Pass, things look good there. Windy Pass, Portage, and down toward Chilkoot and White. We really think thunderstorm conditions will probably set up a little bit better down across southeast. So this is a little bit more on the unusual side for what we show on these maps there, but certainly something to keep in mind. It does look like that main channel for convection will probably push across southeastern Alaska as we go. Now on to your freezing levels. You can see a little bit of colder air dropping southward across the Brooks Range into the northern parts of the Yukon, 2,000 all the way down toward 8,000 foot levels there, really pushing the heat further south there. You can see the 10,000 foot level across southeast, across southern parts of south central and southwest, and most of the interior, again, really looking at levels between about 6 and I would say 10, almost 12,000 feet in some cases. So the air is very warm. Freezing levels combined with the moisture really sets the stage here. Freezing or icing potential is generally above 10,000 feet across the northern Yukon and the Northwest Territories, and way out west above 10,000 feet as well. There is some moisture that is certainly wrapped up in that high pressure ridge that's blowing from south to north across the west coast, but it's so high up there, it didn't even draw it on. Shower and thunderstorm activity is expected to create the potential for isolated severe icing, of course, in the vicinity of those convective towers. Here's the jet stream. High pressure sitting across south central, a deep southerly flow zipping right up the west coast and into the Bering Strait and the Chukchi Sea, wrapping around some of that continental heat and moving that southward. Low pressure across the Pacific Northwest. This pattern is moving along a little bit, but not terribly fast. At 9,000 feet, a similar flow. High pressure sitting over the Gulf. Southerlies up the west coast, up to 45 knots around Nome. And then north and westerly winds across the northern interior. Light westerly flow around the Alaska Range and south into southeastern Alaska. Offshore flow and low pressure out over the Bering Sea. At 3,000 feet, the low is a little bit further to the north and west, but our high pressure ridge is the main driver here with southerlies across the west coast, still going at about 35 to 45 knots. And the ridge, again, blowing offshore winds across southeastern Alaska as we go into Wednesday. So as far as turbulence goes, we're going to focus on northern parts of the Seward Peninsula. Looks like Shishmaref, St. Lawrence Island, Gamble, and Savunga into parts of the Kuskokwim Delta, the Alaska Peninsula, and the eastern chain. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, joined again by Eric Stevens from the GINA, or Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thanks for joining us again, Eric.
Glad to be here.
Thanks. We are talking about satellites today, and what are satellites? And the easy way to talk about that would be to introduce our friend the globe here, which is a round spheroid type shape. We haven't been on a flat Earth as far as history is known for several hundred years now, and because of that we also know that we are orbiting around other objects in space, and that objects are orbiting around the Earth as well. We call all those things satellites in some form or fashion, right, Eric?
Right. Well, this leads to the discussion of Johannes Kepler's research 400 years ago. Did some of the early work and founded the 3 laws of planetary motion, which are important to planets and also to weather satellites.
Okay.
Kepler's first law talks about how the orbit of an object around another object is an ellipse, not necessarily a circle.
Kind of a flattened circle?
Yeah, depending on how flat
squished
it could be.
Okay.
For our purposes, we'll just say they're mostly circular.
Okay.
The second law is most important for us, though, and that is the closer an object is to the thing it's orbiting, the faster it goes. So in the solar system, the planet Mercury is the closest planet to the sun. It orbits the sun in 88 days. It moves at 100,000 kilometers an hour.
It's a lot different than Earth.
Moving.
Okay.
Right. And further out from the Earth is Jupiter, and it moves at only 1/4 the speed of Mercury, and it has to go further, so it takes 12 of our years for Jupiter to make one lap. The further out you are, the slower you go.
Okay.
So we're talking about planets. What does it have to do with weather satellites? Turns out Kepler's laws apply to planets orbiting the sun. They also apply to satellites orbiting the Earth.
Okay.
You know, our natural satellite is the moon. There's the famous Apollo 8 Earthrise shot.
Beautiful shot.
Oh, yeah, you could just talk about that forever. December 1968, the moon is about 250,000 miles away from the Earth.
Okay.
It takes a month to go around the Earth. It's that far out, it takes a full month to do an orbit. Another shot here of the International Space Station. Instead of being 250,000 miles out, the ISS is only 250 miles up. It's really close. And so it doesn't take a full month for the space station to go around the Earth. It only takes 90 minutes. It's so close, it just whips right around 90 minutes.
Okay.
So weather satellites, there are a number of weather satellites, and there are a number of orbits. The further out you have the satellite, the longer it takes to go around the Earth. And this is important because different satellites have different purposes. So we have a satellite here. This little salt shaker lid will serve as our satellite going around the Earth. Let's say you have a satellite that's 22,000 miles above the Earth. This is kind of a magical spot, because at that distance, it takes a full day for the satellite to go around the Earth. Imagine if you put your satellite 22,000 miles up from the equator and had it go with the Earth as the Earth spun.
The same speed.
Right. The satellite goes around the Earth just as fast as the Earth itself is turning. In effect, the satellite will hover in one spot.
I see.
And it appears when you make a movie loop of picture after picture after picture. You can replay that and you get these movie loops. Geostationary satellites, these are called, because they're stationary in appearance. And they provide a constant frame of reference. We've got an example here. Another nice thing about these satellites, since they're that far out at 22,000 miles, you can see from pole to pole, which is nice. So they're pretty broad view and a constant frame of reference.
So those are the pictures. If you're watching a weather satellite loop on TV, your favorite weather show, that's the picture that you're going to see, is one that's sitting over the same spot.
If you're seeing a movie loop play again and again, that came from geostationary satellites. That's the only way you can do that.
Yeah.
The bummer, though, for us in Alaska is we're up on the very top of the planet. And for geostationary satellites to work, they have to be over the equator. So for the geostationary bird to view Alaska, it's kind of like reading a book, but you're reading it edge on like that.
Right.
So there's another kind of orbit called the polar orbit, which is nice. We're near the pole.
Yeah.
And here's a satellite. Those polar orbiters are much closer to the Earth, getting down toward International Space Station elevation. And they're not in the equatorial plane. Rather, their orbital plane is inclined like this. And the Earth turns under that satellite. as the satellite orbits. The nice thing about that is for Alaska, the satellite will go right over Alaska a few times a day. And so you get a much closer image. We've got a shot from the Sumi NPP satellite. Specifically, it's a true color image from the VIRS sensor. That's an acronym there.
Okay.
But it's a beautiful shot of Alaska, and you can see so much detail. The kind of detail, because you're close in.
Very high resolution.
You couldn't get this kind of view from geostationary satellites. The advantage of these polar orbiters is nice close imagery. You can see a lot of detail. The disadvantage, though, is that the satellite flies by, and then you have to wait a while to get the next image. And if geostationary weaknesses are that you're reading the page like that, the polar orbiter, you're reading the page straight on, but it's so close, and then it zips by, and you have to wait for the satellite to come around the Earth again. So there's no one perfect solution. Different satellites for different orbits. Each has their strength, and amazingly, it all comes back to Johannes Kepler and his laws of planetary motion. The same laws that govern how the planets orbit the sun, they govern how the satellites orbit the Earth, and even our little pretend salt shaker right here.
Right, okay. Well, since the 1957 Sputnik, we've been putting man-made objects into orbit around the Earth and starting to get pictures back. Who knows what will happen in the next 50 to 100 years. Amazing stuff.
It's a growing science, and the future is bright.
Thank you so much for joining us again, Eric. And for more information on Dehne and what the satellite systems do there and what Eric's been talking about today, you can go to the web address on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
On your marine weather now, watch for higher concentration ice to linger from Point Barrow eastward toward Dead Horse, Prudhoe Bay, and then a little bit of marginal ice closer to the coast. Probably not shore-fast ice, but certainly some higher concentration and lower concentration ice right around the Beaufort here. You'll notice that broad area of marginal ice really hasn't changed a whole lot in the last several days. The pack ice still remains off to the north, and we're still getting a lot of changes there just north of Point Barrow with generally open water, but not sea ice-free water there in the Chukchi. So for the very latest information anytime, head to weather.gov/Anchorage/ice. This map was updated today, June 25. Across the Inside Passage, light winds and small seas. Looks like a good day on the Lynn Canal tomorrow, and northwesterlies coming down through Stevens Passage and Clarence Strait. Northwesterlies a little stronger across the outer coast, 15 to 25. Seas holding from 4 to 6 feet on Wednesday and coming up a little bit more, 4 to 7, maybe even 8 feet outside of Craig and the Dixon entrance on Thursday afternoon. Northwesterlies remain light across the Inside Passage, a little bit more of a westerly flow coming through Ketchikan and Metlakatla and the Clarence Strait there on your Thursday, with westerlies at 15 outside of Yakutat and Icy Cape with 4-foot seas. Prince William Sound, you're looking at southwesterlies, 15 knots, 2-foot seas, southwesterly winds across the north and western Gulf, 4 to 5-foot seas there. A stronger southerly flow develops out around the western Barrens at 20 knots with a 5-foot sea, 10 knots, and 2-foot seas across the northern Cook Inlet there. That light southerly wind, and again, watch out for smoke over parts of Cook Inlet. Across Thursday, it looks like we'll see generally light west and southwesterly winds, 15 to 25 knots. Look for a 10 to 15 knot wind. 2 to 4-foot seas expected on the inside, and then westerlies 10 to 25 across the western Gulf, the strongest of which will be out across the eastern Barren Islands, 25 knots and 6-foot seas there. Across Bristol Bay, 15 knots, 3-foot seas. Look for a southeasterly wind to be stronger across the Alaska Peninsula with 7-foot seas on the Bering Sea coast side, 12-foot seas on the Pacific side, and a south and westerly wind that'll be ripping through the Shelikof Strait region, 25 knots and 8-foot seas there, a little choppy for sure, 6-foot seas on the eastern side of Kodiak. Look for winds to come down just a little bit out across the Alaska Peninsula, still holding on to 25 to 30 knot winds though, 3-foot seas inside of Bristol Bay, 8-foot seas for Shelikof on Thursday, and 6 to 7-foot seas on the southern and eastern side of Kodiak Island with a 20 to 25 knot sea for your Thursday. Light winds out across the west, high pressure is still in charge here. You've got low pressure a little bit further to the north and to the west, and that's what's creating the stronger winds here. But what's behind that is a pretty small season light winds. Look for a southeasterly flow coming into the frontal boundary there with 8 to 13-foot seas, 30 knots. And again, that southeasterly flow, a little bit of a variation here from Atka to Nikolsky as that pattern is moving through, and then you can see it drawing into that boundary there. Westerlies 15 to 25, southerlies around on Alaska, 7 to 11 foot seas there, and westerlies over Adak and Atka coming in. Anywhere out to the west, about 20 to 25 ahead of the next weather system there. Seas coming up 6 to 8 feet on Thursday. For St. Paul and St. George, we expect to see southeasterlies at 20 knots with 7-foot seas. A stronger southeasterly flow going north. Again, all of this around that boundary that's working into western Alaska now. 25 to 30 knot winds with 6 to 9-foot seas south of Makoriak and into the Kuskokwim Delta. That should come down a little bit on Thursday. Look for 7-foot seas in the region. 15 knots from the south and east for St. Paul and St. George, and 15 knots and small seas in Norton Sound. A southeasterly flow will be blowing into Nome. For Wednesday across the Beaufort, light winds and small seas there in the ice-free waters. Look for a easterly flow across the Chukchi Sea, 15 knots and 3-foot seas expected there. As we get into Thursday, light winds, small seas for the region with only 1 foot forecast for most areas, 10 to 15 knots from the east. And across the Chukchi coast, look for 15 knots and about 2 to 4-foot seas, 5-foot seas in the Bering Strait region, though, with that 20-knot wind. Let's recap your weather tonight. Low pressure is hovering out across the western Bering, but high pressure is filling in behind. We expect to see pockets of light rain and drizzle in the region, especially in the vicinity of that dying frontal boundary that's moving into western Alaska. High pressure is sitting here across the Gulf, and that is pumping a lot of heat and dry air into the north. That's going to keep most of the interior, the north slope, southwest, south central, and really parts of southeast high and dry for the coming days. No significant rains expected really across southeast for a while. Colder air is trying to drop south. That will stay out over Canada. Watch for showers and maybe even an isolated thunderstorm across some of the higher terrain near southeast. Chances are most of you won't see that down where you are, but be ready just in case. Showers around the Talkeetnas and parts of the northern Alaska range as we get into Wednesday. Most areas are going to stay dry. Watch for smoke coming in for the south and southwest areas there over the Swan Lake fire and heading northward into the Anchorage Bowl and for many other locations northward as we go, and a lot of smoke in the interior for the rest of the week. Thanks for watching.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.